What I want to talk about is the coronavirus epidemic. And in the top picture here, this is the picture as of 6th February of the BBC. These colored regions here are countries which have been affected by this epidemic of coronavirus. In strict terms, this is still an epidemic. It's not a pandemic yet, in terms of its classic definition, but it's probably on the way to becoming a pandemic. So within a few days to a week, we should understand better what it should be classified as. So before starting to talk about the coronavirus, which is really the main topic of this lecture, let me sort of start a little differently with a different story of another disease which is related to the coronavirus. It's called MERS. And I want to start with the headline. The headline is the following. So this is taken from the CNN webpage in 2015, June 2nd. It says 2 MERS patients die in South Korea. Okay? So CNN, as you know, is one of the largest news organizations in the world. It's interesting that they chose to highlight the fact that 2 people died of a particular disease in a particular country. So the person who died was a 68-year-old South Korean man who had traveled very widely in the Middle East. He started here in Bahrain, went to the UAE and came back to Bahrain, went to Saudi Arabia, came back to Bahrain, went to Qatar, and from Qatar he flew directly to South Korea. In South Korea, he reached South Korea on the 4th of May. He fell ill by the 11th of May 2015 and died some days later. So here's what we know about this person. He infected a number of people with the same disease that he was carrying. So this is all the people that he infected. This gentleman here is the person himself. The color here is 4 healthcare workers, 4 hospital staff who became infected. The people here are all visitors who are visiting other people in the same hospital. This is his wife over here, who was also infected. This is a bunch of people who were fellow patients at the same time, in the same ward as this person was. And then you had from there people going on to infect other people, or secondary cases, both here and over here. In some cases they were fellow patients, in some cases they were people who were not at the hospital at all. Okay? Now the question is, why was so much trouble taken to figure all of this out? Who did the patient come into contact with? Who did he speak to? To what level did they intersect each other? And this is interesting because some of you who've been to hospital for a few days will not recall ever having to provide your doctor a detailed list of who all you spoke to, who you interacted with, etc., who your family members were, and so on. So what's special about this particular disease that required such measures? The reason is simple, is that MERS, which is the disease that he had, is an untreatable disease. There is no medicine, there is no vaccine for this particular disease. It's often fatal, so patients die in a matter of few days. It's transmitted from person to person. It's an infectious disease with the potential of becoming a pandemic. A pandemic is a disease that goes over a very short time, covers a large number of countries. It's not just simply the country where it started out with. Okay? MERS originated in Saudi Arabia. If you recall his travel, a lot of times he was intersecting Saudi Arabia and then coming back until he finally wound up in Korea where he went to hospital. And this is the cases here. This is the number of cases as a function of year. So this is 2012, 13, 14, 16, 17, 18, 19. And this little red blotch here is the Korea part, the cases that were reported from Korea. But otherwise, most of these cases really are from Saudi Arabia as well as the countries that surround Saudi Arabia. That's how we know what the MERS is doing. The reason we're interested in MERS, or the reason for the particular importance of MERS, is that the country Saudi Arabia sees among the largest gatherings of people in the world over a very short period of time, over a few weeks. And that's a pilgrimage for the Hajj. Okay? So pilgrims who come to the Hajj go back to the country they came from, and currently that number is around 188 to 190 different countries. So you can imagine the public health implications of someone who catches MERS in a country, in Saudi Arabia when they come for the Hajj. This is a disease that has no treatment, has no vaccine, is untreatable and moves fast from person to person, and is fatal in a large number of cases. Imagine if they went back to 188 country where they came from, carrying this disease with them, and think about the public health implications of that particular fact. It's not just a Saudi Arabian problem, but wherever you have large gatherings of people, and this is our own Indian large gathering of people, this is the Kumbh Mela, Again, whenever you have people very close to each other and in a position to transfer a disease that I have to you just by virtue of coming into close proximity, that's a public health worry. How do we ensure that there are no people with the sort of diseases in this large group that can be transmitted from one to another, as well as lack any treatment, as well as are, in some fraction of the cases, fatal? So let's go back to a little bit of history to the last millennium. We're now in new millennium. So the last millennium, the major epidemic was Spanish flu. And at least not really millennium, but in the last, let's say, 150 odd years. Spanish flu, as well as HIV/AIDS, which I won't talk about, was unusual. So this is an example of a huge number of people, a large hospital ward of patients who were hospitalized with the Spanish flu. It's a type of influenza, so it's known for short as flu, and it acted over a fairly short period of January 1918 to December 1919. It was about almost 2 years. It infected about 50 million people around the world. And particularly hard hit was the Indian population, because about 15 to 20 million died in India alone. Okay? And this number is about 3 to 5% of the world's population at that time. So again, a disease that affected a large number of people. It killed only about 2.5% of its victims, among the fraction of people who were infected by it. But because it infected such a large number, in the tens of millions, the fraction who died was also very large, and also medical care was cruder then. And the other point is, this is at the end of the First World War. So the people who were affected by this were people whose immune systems were already severely compromised. They had suffered through years of stress as well as various nutritional deprivation. So they were easy targets for a virus that came along. So let's look at this millennium so far, and ask what's happened. None of them have been on the scale of Spanish flu, but these are all terms and words that you will have heard earlier. So this is, first of all, you must have heard of SARS, sort of swept in between the years 2002 and 2003. This is severe acute respiratory syndrome. Then there is H1N1, which is related in a sense to the old Spanish flu, which is 2009. There is MERS, which we spoke about, which is 2012. Then Ebola, which originally was observed in 1976, and then came back in 2013, 2015, and so on. And there currently is a public health crisis going on with Ebola, except that it's been overshadowed by the new coronavirus and the problems associated with that. And there is, of course, the 2009 new coronavirus, which we are currently experiencing. And you should notice that this line doesn't really terminate here. You expect, as time goes on, that there will be more of these outbreaks. We don't know where they will come from. And it's interesting to ask what might be the true emerging outbreaks of infectious disease in the next 20 or 30 or 50 years. So SARS, MERS, which we spoke about, and the new coronavirus are all caused by the same type of virus. They're all coronaviruses. So in a sense, calling this the coronavirus is wrong, because it's just an example of a coronavirus, and other coronaviruses have been implicated in these other diseases. And the reason it's called a coronavirus is because of this particular crown-like shape, or the corona, as the old root goes. All of these diseases here lack a treatment and lack a vaccine. So let's ask, what is a disease? And for those of you who may not remember this, what is a virus? You can classify disease broadly into two types. One is a sort of disease that you can get from someone else, as an infectious disease here, and the other is a non-infectious disease. For example, it could have some genetic cause, or it could be related to lifestyle. For example, obesity, which has nothing to do with any infectious disease that you might get. All infectious diseases, we understand where they come from. They tend to be caused by a bacterium, a virus, a parasite, and in some special cases it might be misfolded protein, might be a worm of some sort. But essentially we know where they come from. They come from sort of essentially biological molecules that are mostly organized into some sort of single cell. So here are some examples. And the V here indicates it's from a virus, the B is from a bacterium, and P is from a parasite. Okay? So H1N1 is a viral disease, dengue is a viral disease, malaria is a parasitic disease. Chickenpox is viral, influenza, which is a flu, is a viral disease, tuberculosis is a bacterial disease, MERS is a virus, SARS is a virus. On the right hand side, all of these are diseases that you can get from somebody. In some cases indirectly, for example with malaria, and in some cases directly, for example from direct person-to-person transmission, which is true for MERS and SARS. In the non-infectious, which we won't be talking about, are all diseases like diabetes, anemia, cancer, arthritis, obesity. You can be next to a person who has any of these diseases and be 100% confident that you will never get this from them. For example, diabetes. While you can see bacteria under the sort of regular microscope that you might have in university laboratory, an optical microscope, viruses are really much smaller. So that's what a bacterium looks like. That's what a virus looks like. One of the many types of shapes that viruses can take. Bacteria are living organisms. They multiply very rapidly if you give them the right conditions. It's your response to them, your immune response, that makes you sick. Not so much the fact that there's bacteria inside you, but the fact that your body is mounting some response to the bacteria. Antibiotics attack bacteria and are totally useless against viral diseases. So if you have a viral disease, there's absolutely no use in having an antibiotic because they have absolutely no effect on that. Okay? The viruses straddle the boundary between living and non-living. In some respects they're living, in some respects they're non-living. They're non-living because they can really do nothing on their own. It's only when they enter a cell and then use the cell's machinery in order to multiply that they can make multiple copies of themselves. And just in the act of making copies of themselves, they fill up the volume of the cell and burst the cell altogether. And that releases lots of these little viruses, which can then go on to infect other cells. You can transmit bacteria and viruses between humans directly or indirectly. So direct contact might mean I sneeze into your face, I shake your hand and then do this to my nose, etc. Or also through indirect contact. For example, I open a door, I have a viral disease, I open the door, I leave my hand has now touched it, and you come along, open the doorknob again, and that transfers to you. You can sneeze, the droplets that you emit can be imbibed by someone else here. The other way of transmitting diseases is through intermediate organisms called vectors. So mosquito-borne diseases like dengue and so on, dengue and malaria, are vector-borne diseases because you need an intermediate organism which can function to connect you to the source of the disease. Some diseases strangely come to us from animals. Their natural hosts are animal hosts, but from time to time something unusual happens to the DNA that they carry and it becomes capable of infecting a human. So this happens fairly rarely, and usually the viruses that affect poultry or pigs, cows and so on don't have an effect on you at all. But it's in these rare instances where they can actually accumulate changes that are required to become infectious to you, that they can come and lodge in your body and make you sick. And those are special cases because your body does not recognize them. These are not any sort of intruder that it has seen before. And that's why these tend to be particularly dangerous. So the technical word is spillover. So they've spilled over to us from animals. And all of these that I gave you, the SARS, MERS, and the novel coronavirus, are all examples of viruses that have come to us from hosts that are naturally animals. They're not all bad. I mean, the coronaviruses are the second leading cause of the common cold. So chances are if you've had a common cold, about 10 to 12% of them are caused by coronavirus. You will really not be able to tell the difference in any of them, whether your cold was caused by a cold virus or a coronavirus of this sort. And if you go back a couple of decades, no coronavirus has caused any disease more serious than a cold. And that has changed. Earlier, these used to circulate largely among animals, including camels, bats, and pigs. And something has happened to break that barrier between animal and human being. So very quick sort of stop at this question of why are we constantly falling ill? We're surrounded by bacteria. We're surrounded by people who are sneezing and coughing in our faces. The reason is that we have a finely developed immune system that protects us. We have some part of our immune system that is really agnostic towards what particular external organism it is which was coming to attack us. So that's our innate immunity. And the other part of our immunity is acquired immunity. If we have seen a particular pathogenic organism earlier, our body is attuned to dealing with it. Okay? So any prior contact helps the immune system recognize the invader. And what a vaccination does is essentially to prepare your immune system to deal with the real thing when it actually comes. So let me go back to now thinking about the coronavirus. Now that you have the background and all of the terminology to think about this, let's now get back to what actually happened with the coronavirus. So the technical name for this currently is 2019 NCOV, where N stands for novel, COV stands for coronavirus. There has been some discussion about the fact that one needs a better name for this. This is just intended as a temporary name, but they haven't come up with that yet. So for now, it's just called 2019 NCOV or a coronavirus currently. So all of this started on the 31st of December 2019, so that's a little more than a month ago, when the World Health Organization was informed of an outbreak of pneumonia of an unknown cause in a particular city in China. That city was Wuhan city. It's the seventh largest city in China. It has about 11 million residents, so that automatically makes it bigger than Chennai, Hyderabad or Bangalore. It's just a little smaller than Delhi, Kolkata and Bombay. Already, hospitals in Wuhan city had been seeing cases that looked like pneumonia pretty much through December 2019. And they didn't know where it was coming from, but finally diagnosed it as some form of viral pneumonia. Okay? Pneumonia is normally a bacterial disease, but there are forms of pneumonia that you can get from viruses. And the difficulty was to find out, is it bacterial in origin? When they discovered that it wasn't, then it must be viral. If it's viral, what is the virus that actually causes it? That's where Wuhan is, by the way, in China. The symptoms that people were reporting with were cough, fever, shortness of breath, runny nose, pneumonia in some cases, especially the most severe ones. So these symptoms that I listed, you'll recognize as all being flu-like. And people with this 2019 novel coronavirus or the flu or a cold all have similar symptoms. But it's important to remember that there are different viruses involved in each of these. All of these come from different families of viruses. So it's difficult to identify the disease just from the symptoms. There's nothing specifically symptomatic about the novel coronavirus disease. What you do need to tell is a specific laboratory test for the disease. Some things people found out fairly early once this cluster of patients actually came in. And that was that many of those who were infected either worked or frequently shopped in a particular seafood market. That was called the Wuhan Seafood Wholesale Market, which is pretty much in the center of the city. So this is a blow-up of what Wuhan city looks like. And that's where the airport is. That's where the seafood market is, close to the Yangtze River, which is a major... Wuhan is a major Chinese city where a lot of manufacturing goes on. And the river is very important to all of the trade that it actually does. That's what the seafood market looked like on the 21st of January, by which time it had already been shut for about 20 days. So what happened after December 31st? So that's December 31st. The World Health Organization was informed that there were 27 viral pneumonia cases, of which 7 were critical, and there might be some connection to a seafood market. By the 1st, the seafood market had been closed. There was a preliminary report that this is not the standard SARS. It could also exhibit pneumonia-like symptoms. By the 3rd, this number of 27 had gone on to 44 cases, of which 11 were critical. That was the point where the first report from the Wuhan municipal health authorities came in, saying to the public that there is something that is wrong. We see an unexplained cluster of pneumonia cases, and these have an unknown origin. This may be connected to the seafood market. From there, up to the 9th of January, so this is all January, so this up to here is December, this is January, the CDC in China reported that this is a novel virus. It's not only is it novel, it's a novel coronavirus, which is the causative agency for 15 of the 59 pneumonia cases. At that time, they could not scan all of them together. By the 10th, the first genome sequence of the coronavirus had been sequenced. So that's actually very fast by the normal way, if you sort of look at the normal ways, normal amount of time it takes for the genome of a particular disease-causing organism to be identified. By Jan 13th, we began to see the first case outside China, in this case in Thailand. By Jan 19th, it was the first cases in China outside of Wuhan. Wuhan is also a very important airport. So Wuhan airport connects to many countries in Southeast Asia. By January 20th, it was found that coronavirus could be transmitted between humans, and infections in Japan and South Korea began to be seen. By the 21st of January, you began to see cases in the US and Taiwan, all from travelers who were returning to the US and Taiwan from Wuhan province, from Wuhan city. There were multiple provinces in China that reported cases, and then you also began to see cases in Hong Kong, Macau, Singapore, and Vietnam. All the countries that sort of surround China, that border China. So here is a visualization of what happened. This visualization starts on the 3rd of January. And let me just start it off. Look at the confirmed cases here. You can see the spread as the color changes. You can see as you it sort of speeds up as you get towards the end by the time you get to January 30th. And you can see that now a fair chunk of the globe actually has a red color, which means there is something that has been, there's a case that has been reported from that particular case. So this is, the source of this data was the Chinese National Health Commission, Provincial Health Authorities. I have to remember who made this particular GIF. It's just shown as one color. It doesn't mean that there are cases from all over. Even if one case has been reported from there, it's shown as red. So the Johns Hopkins has this very nice website that shows you every day, and almost as cases are reported, where they appear on the map, the number of deaths, the number of confirmed cases, the countries that are involved, and it plots this increase of the total number of confirmed cases as a function of time. So this is January 27th, 2020. There's a kind of cluster here. There are 4,474 cases, of which 107 deaths have been reported. By the time you get to February 8th, so this is today, downloaded this morning, that's what it looks like. 34,887 confirmed cases and 724 deaths. And this red has become a much larger and a broader red. Outside China, so this is 7th February, that's yesterday, these are the cases that have been reported from Japan, Singapore, Thailand, South Korea, Taiwan, Australia, Malaysia, Germany, etc. Currently, the count is about 25 different countries around the world that have been affected by the coronavirus, in the sense of having reported cases of people in that country who have tested positive for the coronavirus. So let's go back and put some terminology in place. So let's start with an outbreak. An outbreak is just a disease that appears in greater numbers than is normal for a particular community. Almost always there's a steady background of cases of influenza or cases of malaria, etc. But if that number spikes, let us say it becomes 5 times or 10 times what is normally expected, one calls that an outbreak. From there, an epidemic is when this outbreak begins rapidly to spread to people over a broader geographical location, but typically confined to within a certain region. For example, almost all of the cases so far, 99% of them have been from China, which sort of constitutes its own geographic region. But the cases that you have seen outside are almost invariably from people who have moved from China to that particular country, either to Hong Kong or to Singapore or to Taiwan and so on and so forth. Okay? So in that sense, this is still an epidemic. There is no evidence for large-scale sustained transmission from person to person unconnected to China after the initial case was actually written. Of course, Hollywood has always got into the act, so there are sort of lots of Hollywood movies along the theme of having infectious diseases called contagion, pandemic, virus, and so on and so forth. A pandemic is when the epidemic becomes global. And the moment you have evidence that people are transmitting disease from one to the other, but this has nothing to do, this now happening independently of the original seeded case, which might have come in from China. So once it happens across multiple regions, this is what you call a pandemic, because now essentially the whole world is a threat of a particular disease, and it has crossed a particular regional boundary. We are not there yet. We are still at the stage where the majority of cases are cases of Chinese coming to different countries and then infecting people there. So sustained human-to-human transmission in those countries, independent of that case, has not yet happened. An example of a pandemic is HIV/AIDS, which is now seen in a very large number of countries around the world. And that's been completely independent of where it started out with. What the WHO has done, sort of apart from this final step of declaring it a pandemic, is to declare this epidemic a public health emergency of international concern. It's called a PHEIC, P-H-E-I-C. This was done on January 30th. So this is, I think, the third meeting that they had. In the first 2 meetings, they couldn't decide, so they said, let's not do it now. But in the January 30th meeting, they finally made a decision here, these people that you can see here, to declare this. The WHO is a conservative organization because it realizes that when it announces something officially, it has the potential for people to take it very seriously. And for example, airports to shut down, countries to quarantine, markets to shift rapidly, etc., etc. So it's very, very aware of the consequences of its public statements, and it weighs them very carefully. There have been only these many prior PHEICs, FEECs, the 2009 H1N1 swine flu, the 2014 poliovirus, Ebola in 2014, Ebola again in 2018-19, the Zika virus in 15-16, and the NCOV over here. Okay, so this is in a sense tells you about the gravity with which this is being viewed. Yeah. It's a pandemic is a separate declaration. It's not. The WHO will declare something to a pandemic when it reaches a certain level called level 6. We're not at level 6 yet. We're at level 5. Let me tell you a little bit more about coronaviruses and how they hop from animals to animals. There are 7 human coronaviruses. So these are viruses that humans harbor or can harbor. There's HCOV, 229E, so and so, so and so, so and so, and then we get to SARS, MERS, and the current virus here. The infection by any of these is typically seasonal, like flu. The flu season tends to start in about August, September, survive during the winter months, and you don't see much flu in the summer months. Rarely you can transfer coronaviruses between animals and people. Most of them have a specific animal or a host animal that they infect, but occasionally, as I said, they evolve to infect people. The SARS is now currently understood to have first been transmitted to humans from civet cats. So there's cats that look like that. The reservoir, the real reservoir from which it moved to the civet cats, were bats. MERS, which we spoke about initially, came to humans from camels, from dromedary camels. For NCOV, the debate is still alive. It's very likely to have been bats who were the original reservoir, and from bats they may have moved. There's a suggestion that they moved to pangolins, and from pangolins to humans. Okay, so these are somewhat unusual sources for hosts, for intermediate hosts, for a virus. A little bit about these two diseases. SARS killed about 800, about 10% of the people who fell ill across 29 countries. MERS is more deadly, so it claimed more than 30% of the people it infected, and there were 2,494 confirmed cases in 27 countries. What about the coronavirus? Where did it come from, and how is it spreading? So early on, as I mentioned, many of these patients had some link to the seafood market in Wuhan. And that suggested that there might be some animal to human spread. Okay, that there must have been some animal carrying it there, and that moved from the animal to the human. From there, to have human to human spread is still another step. That could be a much more difficult thing than the animal to human. But later, after this, the increasing number of patients who did not have direct contact with the market itself suggested that the mode had shifted to a person-to-person spread. And so this was a disease that was capable of actually moving from person to person. That's what the seafood market in Wuhan looked like, and it was understood that it was the origin of the outbreak. This is a wet market, and we'll come back to this particular term a little later. It's a wet market because large amounts of water are used to slosh the floors and to keep it cleaned up, especially for a market that has wild animals in it, because they dirty the place. You want to try to clean it up to get your fresh batches in, and also to allow people to walk in and out. We don't quite understand the exact connection yet, although I will say a little bit more about it. Why is it that all of this seems to have started at the seafood market? And is that true at all in the first place once we look at the full spectrum of cases that were reported? So what are the questions we can ask about an epidemic? In fact, what are the questions we can ask about any epidemic? The first question is, how do diseases affect populations, large groups of people? And this field of study is called epidemiology. So for example, you have number of people ill. It sort of changes with time as you go along in time. You might want to ask, what is that proportion of ill people as a function of time for a particular disease which starts off at a particular location? So the question you could ask is, starting from a few infected persons, will the disease spread or not? And that's the first question that you must ask about a disease. Is it capable of spreading? Is it capable of becoming an epidemic? The second question is, how many people will be infected, given that some information about that disease? The third question is, what can you do to prevent it? Can a vaccine help? All of these, the answers to these questions, depend upon just one number, as epidemiologists understand it. This number is called the basic reproductive ratio. I'll tell you what that number is, but essentially what epidemiologists across the last 80 to 100 years of work have identified is the sheer importance of the single number as characterizing a particular disease and its ability to spread. has a simple interpretation, and that interpretation is just the following. Suppose I take one person infected with that disease and implant that person in a population that is completely susceptible to the disease. How many persons on average does that single infected person manage to infect? Here are some numbers for a bunch of different diseases. Ebola, the number is 2. For swine flu, H1N1, it's 2. For HIV, it's 4. For smallpox, it's 7. For measles, it's 18. So measles is an extremely infectious disease. If I am susceptible to measles and there is one person with measles in this room, pretty much any contact with them is guaranteed to get it. Whereas Ebola is much harder to get. Now that may seem surprising because you've heard about what a terrible disease Ebola is and people are so concerned about it. The reason is that you really need close physical contact with an Ebola vector. So even if you have close physical contact, that can be enough, but you need to have that contact in the first place. So people who are healthcare workers who handle bodies of Ebola victims and move, they're very susceptible because they're actually physically in contact with them. But most other people are not because you may not just come that close to them. For example, for any transfer of body fluids to actually happen. Diseases that tend to be transmitted through the air tend to be in general more infectious because I just need to sneeze in this room, I will sort of emit a whole bunch of aerosolized particles which you can then ingest. Okay? So what's the number here as far as we know for? Okay, so that's what the numbers look like for Wuhan. The reproductive ratio, which is essentially the number of transmissions, seems to be somewhere between 1.5 and 3.5. And there's a lot of argument about this number because people want to get it right. So the number is now creeping to somewhere around 2 is probably the best estimate. But all epidemiological papers will have some estimate for what they think this number ought to be. So it's not so high, it's well below measles. It's even below MERS and SARS, in the sense that SARS sort of clusters around this. It's below smallpox. Over here on the y-axis is a fatality scale, the number of people who die as a consequence of that infection. Okay? So Ebola is almost very fatal. Bird flu is quite fatal over here. As you move up in this axis, you go to the more deadly diseases. As you move down, it's less deadly diseases. So the common cold is hardly deadly at all. Chickenpox is not deadly at all. Seasonal flu is not particularly deadly. Swine flu and the coronavirus sit somewhere there, a little bit, but certainly less than it might have been. Who is being affected? Now this is all very interesting. Okay? So let me caution you that what I'm going to tell you is very preliminary. I have not seen an official announcement. This is part of a report from CNN Philippines by a WHO official over there. So I think these numbers are roughly right, but keep in mind that they might change. About 70% of the cases are among people above 40. And of these, around 40%, which is a fairly large number, had some underlying medical condition. For example, they were either diabetic, they had cardiovascular disease, etc., etc., etc. There was something was wrong with them before that, before they even contacted this particular disease. The death rate, people who are infected with the disease and then thereafter die, is about 1 to 2% of those. So 1 to 2% of the people who are infected will die. This number goes to about 88% for patients above the age of 60. So old age certainly predisposes you to dying if you contact the coronavirus. The median age is very high, 75 years. So really that's saying is that there is an advantage to being young. It's the older people who are at risk. And again, 70% had pre-existing medical conditions. Again, I warn you that this is preliminary. So the conclusions that you can draw from this, assuming that it's broadly correct, is that older people are those who are predominantly affected. And even among them, those with pre-existing problems, pre-existing conditions or lowered immunity, are even more susceptible to death if they're infected. On average, children and young adults seem to recover fairly well, and a large number, a fairly reasonable fraction, seem to show mild symptoms. Okay? So let's just get to this question before we address other questions of how should you stay protected and what should you look out for. So let me give you one very specific clarification here. The chances that you might contact the coronavirus currently, given the number of cases in India, is basically zero. So all of this that I will tell you is valid if you are staying in Wuhan or if you stay in the parts of Kerala very close to the places where the quarantine patients are and you might come into contact with them. But all of this is in fact useful information in general for viral diseases that are like influenza. But in terms of coronavirus, you really need not bother at all. It's really not going to affect you, certainly for the foreseeable future, given what we know now. So one gets this through both direct and indirect contact. Typically, direct contact will involve transferring the virus physically through contact with some oral secretion, for example, the mucus that you might throw up. Indirect is, as I said, you can sneeze on some surface, and someone might wipe that surface or pass by it, and then later rub their nose or mouth with it. Okay? The droplets that are generated in medical procedures, whenever there is sort of cutting treatment involved, this is much more worse for medical staff, unless they're properly protected, than it is for other people. So this is another very serious source of how you might get the coronavirus if you're attending to a patient who has it. So this is sort of example of the fact that if you're infected, there's a region of roughly about a meter around, 1.5 meters, 2 meters around you, that people should try to avoid, because your secretions don't go very much further than that. But there's a zone of about a few meters around you that is potentially someone who comes in there can get it from you. As I said, you can sort of wipe, you can touch a surface that someone has sneezed on or put some oral secretion on, and then cover, reach it to your face. And if you're in a crowded situation like a tram car or a subway or something like that, again, that's a sort of rough 1 to 2 meter exclusion region around you for which you can transmit it to. So the recommendation from the World Health Organization, the most important recommendation is wash your hands regularly. Because this whole business of touching surfaces, coming back, wiping your face, you can get rid of that if you just wash your hands in running water on a fairly regular basis. Alcohol-based sanitizers are also okay. They tend to be a little less efficient for these purposes than just washing your hands in water. Social distancing. I mean, whenever you have people who are crowded together in such a high density, and someone is ill, you increase the chances of getting a disease from that person. So maintaining the right level of social distancing in the presence of a disease is something that one can try. In general, avoid touching your eyes, your nose, your mouth, etc. If you have fever, cough, and difficulty breathing, seek medical care. These are the sort of standard symptoms of this. You should have a look at the WHO criteria, which contains an advice for public for exactly, and they will update it as more becomes to be known about the particular virus. And as I said, the WHO is a very conservative organization. It will tell you exactly what you ought to do. And this information comes to the WHO from really many, many, many sources. They collate this information from doctors and clinical personnel all around the world. So what you have as a final recommendation is a synthesis of input from many, many different countries, not just one single government or one single medical practice providing this information. What are the right public health measures to take? And this is where it gets interesting. The first measure that you take in public health situations of this sort is to identify those individuals who are suspected of having the disease, test them rapidly to check whether they do. If they don't, you can let them go. It doesn't matter. It could be a regular influenza, and they have no business tying up a hospital bed or an ICU unit. For people who are ill, you need to find out where they went, who they contacted, who they spoke to, who they came into close physical contact with, just as they did with the MERS virus. Impose restrictions on movement. If someone is suspected of having the disease, it's good to tell them that, look, no, don't take a walk through the city park, don't meet lots of people, don't travel on the metro. Contain your ability to interact with other people as far as possible. For the infected, as I said, there is no cure for this, there is no vaccine. All you can do is provide supportive treatment. Provide a ventilator in a hospital situation, make sure the person is well hydrated, but otherwise wait it out for your own immune system to kick in and deal with this. And finally, devise tests or vaccines or drugs quickly. And the quickly is usually the bottleneck. Over here, the rate at which the genome was sequenced was unprecedentedly fast. And that has led to the development of fast assays based on sort of biological techniques called PCR, by which you can test a person very rapidly for the presence of the disease. So that needs to be done fast, as well as what drug might work, what vaccine might work. These are questions to address. You do need physical infrastructure to deal with large numbers of patients. These are much larger than what a normal hospital can provide. And you need to bring the diagnostic tools in to check whether people have the disease in very fast. That is often a bottleneck, because often you cannot create sufficiently large numbers of test kits to send them out to far-flung regions of the world. Remember that China is an interesting case, because China does a lot of trade and has a lot of important relationships with African countries, where in many cases health infrastructure is not strong enough. So one has to worry about how the World Health Organization has to worry about how you take kits that can optimize for testing for the disease and get them to these far-flung countries fast enough and in good enough numbers. The ability to physically quarantine large populations is something that has really come up with this particular disease in terms of the completely unprecedented efforts that the Chinese government has taken to really contain populations in large numbers. Some of you may have seen pictures like this. These are thermal scanners that are now in airports. If you're coming in from Hong Kong or from China, you will run a gauntlet of people who, essentially this is what they will see behind their screens. So this is an indication of what everybody's body temperature is. And you look for people who have any trace of fever, and then you can ask them to come aside and check what has been their travel history. Could they potentially have encountered someone who could be carrying coronavirus? That's what one of the Chinese hospitals looks like over here for patients who have the coronavirus. This is an interesting, again, a very Chinese innovation. So these are temperature scanners that are mounted on drones. So drones are these little autonomous vehicles that can fly around all over the place. So what has been done here is to mount a little temperature scanner so you can actually track people as you move. So the drone can go around the streets of a town and try to identify people who have an elevated temperature. So January 24th is the date in which it began to be built. It's a 1,000-bed hospital. So that sort of gives you an idea of the scale and the importance with which the Chinese government is treating this. To actually build a hospital with 1,000 plus 1,600 beds in a matter of 10 days is really an amazing achievement. It's really very significant.
Can you say a few words about the doctor who's supposed to warn about the outbreak?
Yeah, so the doctor passed away recently.
In what sense had he warned which is not taken into account seriously?
I think a few days before the public announcement was made, he alerted officials and his colleagues about the fact that this is a new type of pneumonia. And the question, though, which is not completely clear now, was did he die of this or did he die of something else? So the way a lot of the media said that he contracted the coronavirus and died as a consequence. That's not completely clear at the moment from what at least reporting is coming out of China. But certainly he was an important figure, and later the Chinese state media apologized for not taking him seriously and attempting to quash what he said at that time. Let's get from here to somewhat more philosophical and general questions. And that has to do with the rights of citizens. Do governments have a right, in quotes, to curtail the free movement of this? In the sense to essentially take an entire province of several million people and say, we will not permit you to travel. The numbers of people who have either been affected by the disease or have died of the disease is still much, much, much smaller than the total number of people under quarantine. It's approximately 60 million. So to what extent should governments implement measures with this level of strictness, okay, of locking down an entire city? Here's a movie of Wuhan itself. It's a sort of ghostly movie. This is really a city which is a live, bustling city with people. There would have been, standard morning hour traffic would have been completely clogged. You can see one isolated car here and one person moving like that. That's what the roads of Wuhan city look like. There's a headline from a few days ago. It says, China orders Wuhan to round up all suspected coronavirus patients and put them in quarantine camps, as Beijing warns officials who run away from the war will be nailed to the pillar of historical shame. So that's a little stronger language. But really relating to this question of how do you quarantine a large group of people, how do you make them obey that particular quarantine, in which case you might require such strong language. This has been our response, a report on what happened to the students who came back from Wuhan and were housed in Manesar, close to Delhi. And they face water scarcity, unsanitary conditions, limited access to toilets and water supply. We have not done very well on this. And sort of compare this with the Chinese response of building a hospital of 1,600 beds in 10 days. This shows us in bad light. I really think there's no need we should have done this. It just speaks of bad planning. And certainly that's an indication that Indian officials and authorities should take the public health duties much more seriously than they have in the past. Such measures, these large-scale, population-level, city-level quarantines, create a relationship that's antagonistic between citizens and government. It also makes disease tracking more difficult, because once people will then tend to conceal symptoms, because they say, I don't want to get into trouble, I don't want to tell anybody that I'm ill, I'm going to be quarantined, I'm separated from my family. And the other point, of course, is that individuals who suffer from other diseases may simply not get the sort of care that they need because all of the resources are being focused on this single one disease, we see. I want to talk a little bit about, come back to this question of where the disease came from. There's a term for this, it's called a zoonotic disease. A zoonotic disease is a disease that spreads between animals and people. And as I said, MERS is a zoonotic disease, coronavirus is a zoonotic disease, because one believes that the ultimate origin of this was some host which was an animal initially. It's important to remember that of the new or emerging diseases in people now, around 3 out of 4 of them typically come from animals. So this is specifically, we must now pay attention to the role of reservoirs of disease in animals and how we can transfer that disease to ourselves. The interface between the human and the environment, the animal environment, brings us back to the Wuhan seafood market. This market, like large numbers of wet markets in the Far East, is typically under somewhat unhygienic and crowded conditions. The larger issues is that these contain what one would call exotic animals, and these exotic animals are obtained because their habitat is slowly being encroached on and destroyed. Not only that, there is a large trade, often much of it illegal, in wild animals. So in the market, there were a bunch of animals and animal-based products, including live foxes, crocodiles, wolf puppies, peacocks, porcupines, camel meat, etc., etc. That's what the inside or the bottom of a wet market looks like. You see that it has some mixture of body fluids from live wild creatures mixed with blood from butchered animals. And in a sense, this is ideal breeding ground for all sorts of viruses and bacteria to thrive, which is why it's reasonable to think that it was a wet market that had something to do with it. It's just that we don't know what the particular animal was and the way in which it was transmitted between animals. It's just that this is a very natural place for bacteria and viruses to thrive. The larger questions here are the questions about the shift from subsistence hunting by people who really hunt in order to feed themselves to an international and often very illegal trade in wildlife. And this really is driven largely by demand in China for unusual wildlife, unusual foods, etc. This has led to a lot of exposure of different species which would not normally have mixed together in the wild. They would have remained separate. And as you deplete areas of target species, you tend to encroach further and further into regions that were initially almost exclusively the habitat of animals that did not normally come into contact with human beings. This brings us to a bunch of cultural questions as well. Culture and food. What is the nature of the culture that leads to the consumption of exotic animals, as well as the idea that this disease can be used as a way of stigmatizing entire populations. Here is one example. Coronavirus fears fuel racism and hostility, say British Chinese. So Chinese people speaking in Britain sort of feel that they're being tainted by this impression that this is something that arose in China. It's a Chinese problem that is now being exported to the rest of the world. There's a lot of geopolitics and economics in this. Remember that Wuhan is a very significant e-commerce industrial shipping hub. It has a large domestic industry which needs to be sustained. It is tourism, Chinese tourism is affected by this. And one can expect, though the numbers are not yet in, because we don't know where this will actually lead, that this will have consequences for the world economy that we cannot yet predict. So now the question is, what happens next? And this is a question that I'm sure all of you have. Where do we go from here? Let's compare the coronavirus with other viruses. So this is SARS, MERS, number of deaths from SARS, number of MERS, and the number of cases in each case. So the coronavirus has now outstripped, in terms of number of cases, both SARS and MERS. But the number of deaths from this, as a fraction of the larger number of cases, is very small. So let's add a little more information into that mix. Let's talk about influenza, the common flu. So influenza spreads around the world in yearly outbreaks, seasonal influenza, right? About 3 to 5 million cases of severe illness caused by influenza. Okay? And the number of deaths is actually fairly large if you look at the whole world. There are 600,000 deaths in the world that is directly or indirectly attributable to influenza. So in terms of its impact, at some rough preliminary level, you might guess that maybe the coronavirus might be milder than seasonal influenza in terms of the fraction of people exposed to the fraction of people dying. The mortality of seasonal flu is about below 1%, and even then it causes about so many deaths per year globally. SARS has a death rate of more than 10%. The other point is that NCOV doesn't seem to mutate very fast. The AIDS virus, the HIV/AIDS virus, mutates, changes very rapidly. Influenza changes very rapidly, which is why influenza vaccines have to be changed from year to year, because the spectrum of viruses that are circulating in the general population changes from year to year because of mutations. But this coronavirus doesn't seem to be mutating that fast, and that's really a positive as far as public health is concerned. As we said earlier, it seems to infect younger people, but they recover. And the deaths are largely in people who are older and those whose immunity is compromised in some way because there's some other pre-existing condition. In that sense, these people are at risk with influenza anyway, because just by being older, we're automatically more susceptible to influenza. The case fatality ratio, which is number of deaths divided by number of confirmed cases, is likely to be small. So we saw that because we saw this very long bar for the number of confirmed cases and this tiny little bar for the number of deaths. The problem is that that's usually an overestimate, because it's very hard to figure this number out, number of confirmed cases, the number of cases that the lab has confirmed. But there are larger numbers of people who've been infected by this, but who don't show many serious symptoms or sort of goes away in a day or two or so on and so forth. They're not particularly affected. So the number of true cases is probably much larger than the number of confirmed cases for this. And that's why this number is again probably somewhat of an overestimate. There are two scenarios. One is optimistic and one is pessimistic. The optimistic scenario is that all of the interventions that the Chinese government is doing will work, that will serve to contain the epidemic. And right now, 99% of confirmed cases continue to be from China. If no other country sees sustained transmission and these measures work, then the risk of the spread should go down. Okay? This has happened earlier. It happened with the SARS outbreak in 2003, which ended after fewer than 9,000 cases, 8,400 odd. There's a pessimistic scenario to balance this. And that says it's too late to contain the virus. It's already left China. Already there are hints of some direct person-to-person transmission in countries outside China. For example, in Japan, the cruise ship that is now stuck somewhere else outside. And that is what is going to trigger much larger numbers of people getting infected in the coming days. So humanity may just need to adjust to it. But the flip side is, there are already coronaviruses that are circulating. There are 4 of them circulating. These lead to nothing more than the common cold. We do have some level of immunity to these. And maybe just like the common cold, they will become just like that. And they will give rise to occasional outbreaks from time to time. So here is sort of the bottom line. Given what we know, don't be misled by confusing information that you might receive on social media. As of this point, India is safe. The coronavirus is not the end of the world. It appears to be a disease in many ways that is like seasonal influenza. In the sense we are now used to seasonal influenza, we can now cope with it. People fall ill every year, a substantial fraction of people die of it. These people tend to be older, so they need special supportive care. But maybe coronavirus in the long term, even though it has spread around the world, has become a true pandemic, it will become like these other coronaviruses that we are exposed to. Okay? So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your patience.